where you've been, but the two of the brightest men I know trying to work in the school district arena. Please welcome our Superintendent Jeff Brown and Mike Sobel, School Treasurer.
So I grew up in Euclid, Ohio, right on the lake. So I am a lifetime Browns fan. And it is kind of like our Super Bowl because after tonight, it goes downhill. So we really have one opportunity to kind of celebrate what happens within our organization. Thank you for coming tonight. It's a great crowd, and I'm hoping that we can provide a lot of information to the voters of Granville, so when they go into the ballot box on May 8th, they understand what Granville Schools is proposing. So, like Deb said, I'm Jeff Brown, the school superintendent. Mike Sobel is our treasurer. I've been in Granville Schools for 7.5 years. What I'd like to do tonight is talk a little bit about the culmination of almost a 1.5 year conversation with the Board of Education around the long-term sustainable funding of Granville Schools. So what I'd like to do is try and touch on what is on the ballot, why it's needed, how the money is going to be used, and some of the factors that were discussed in that 1.5 years leading up to this ballot being placed for you on May 8th. So what is being proposed is, and I apologize for the typos, that was a previous edition, but what is being proposed is a 1.25% earned income tax that will have a 5-year term that will begin collection on January 1 of 2019. The earned income tax is a relatively new model of taxation. It started in 2004, and it exempts Social Security, pensions, interest, dividends, capital gains, and most pass-through income. So that is what is being placed on the ballot. But the board talked about this in a way that was more of a plan option. And the second part of this is as critically is critical in the process as well. If the income tax passes, 2 property tax levies scheduled to end in 2019 will not be renewed or replaced, resulting in a 5% reduction in the school property tax on all residential property owners. So that is what the board of the school board decided to put on the ballot. So why? Well, the last ballot issue that was elected and supported was in 2013. At that time, the board said we would make the levy last 5 years. It is now 2018, and that levy cycle has started to mature. And the way schools operate, we need more revenue to continue with inflationary costs, and we do that by going back to the voters for additional millage or additional revenue. And so we are at the end of that cycle, that funding cycle, and starting to look down the road and saying, okay, how can we support the schools financially? The other piece to this equation of why this issue is so critically important is our aging infrastructure. Granville School's average age of the building is about 35 years old. We have a 20-year capital plan that lays out every piece of infrastructure within the organization: asphalt, concrete, roof, HVAC, desks, furniture, flooring. That is on our district website. And the revenue needed annually to address those preventative needs is about $1.5 million a year. We currently have $1 million a year. And what we're finding is, of that $1 million that we have to expend for our facilities, we continue to have issues that come up that are more catastrophic in nature. Let me give you a few examples. The first one being, last year we had to replace the intermediate school roof. That was a $500,000 roof. Out of a $1 million budget, we had to defer the maintenance on other items that we would have taken care of in our facilities to address that one concern. So these items that keep occurring will continue to force us to delay maintenance and further erode our infrastructure, and ultimately that would result in the requirement to build new buildings down the road. So what we're trying to do is maintain our infrastructure through preventative maintenance and do it in alignment with that 20-year plan. So how will the money be, how will the money be used? The new money that will be generated from this earned income tax, 64% of that will go into doing exactly what we're doing today in Granville schools, which I will say, as the superintendent, I'm slightly biased, is a very good product. Our schools are in the top 5%, sometimes in the top 2, according to any metric. But the majority of our revenue goes towards supporting our teachers in the classrooms. So salaries and benefits of our teaching staff. So 64% of this new money will go into that, that operating budget. The 13% is to take that $1 million and expand it to the $1.5 million necessary to address our capital improvement plan that extends for 20 years. And then the rest of the money is to meet the unexpected challenges like the roof that I mentioned. We also have issues with our current life safety system. The sprinkler system at the middle school and high school needs to be replaced. That's a $350,000 bill. Those are the types of items that we're dealing with from a facility standpoint that need to be replaced. Maintain class sizes. Despite some of the information that you may have heard, Granville Schools is starting to grow. We have 28 more students in our schools than we did at the beginning of the year. So mobility is starting to increase, and we are starting to receive more students in our schools. And so we do tend to run pretty tight as far as our allocation of teachers. And so anytime we have a mobility bump, we try to adjust within the organization first, but if not, then we have to go outside and hire a new staff member. So it's to meet those requirements to maintain class sizes, and then ultimately it's to build cash reserves. And I want to bring people back to 2010. In 2010, the school district put a levy on the ballot for 5.4 mils. And in November, Governor Kasich was elected, and he inherited an $8 billion deficit in the statewide budget. In February of that year, when I came on board, shortly after that, the governor tweaked his school funding formula, and of the $2 million $2 million that was coming new from that levy, we lost 1.5 of that through the state funding changes. And so almost immediately we were placed in a situation where we had to reassess, and we actually went through a reduction in force and eliminated about 20 to 23 positions during that time before coming back to the voters in 2013. As was, I believe, mentioned earlier, we are going to have a new governor in November. There's no doubt about it. So what we're trying to do is work with the General Assembly right now to propose some funding formulas that would be proposed to both gubernatorial candidates. But in general, any state funding formula is going to view Granville Schools as a wealthy school district. And the philosophy has been, if you have the capacity to pay at the local level, you should. And so that's kind of what we've been dealing with loss of transportation revenue from the state of Ohio and other tweaks to the funding formula. And so what we're trying to do is build up our cash reserves so that we don't have to go through a round of layoffs should the funding formula change. But I also want to talk a little bit more about some of the factors that the board discussed during that year and a half long conversation. The first is economic development. In 2013, we passed by 41 votes. And that was kind of a wake-up call for the Board of Education And immediately we started saying, as a governance team, how can we diversify the tax revenue in Granville? And there are a couple of ways, but the main driver of diversification is a balance between residential and commercial development. And so the board went to the village and the township and said, we need to talk about the economic sustainability of Granville, and particularly the funding of the schools. They formed a task force and looked at the comprehensive plan as to where would there be ripe opportunities for commercial development. Just to give some context, the statewide average, if you look at most municipalities, the average is 75% is residential, 25% is commercial. In Granville, it's not that. It's 90-10. So that 10% commercial requires the residential taxpayer to pay more of the burden. And if we recognize as a school district that our tax rate is high. It's high on the residential taxpayer, but it's also extremely high on the business community. And if we're trying to recruit businesses to Granville that fit our comprehensive plan, it's going to be a hard sell because, quite honestly, they can develop in Newark or Heath and pay about half the tax. So we're fighting a battle with economic development. And so that's been a challenge, and that factored into the board's conversation. The other issue was what we heard in 2013 was from our seniors that they are on fixed incomes and having a very difficult time supporting the schools because the schools' property tax requests are exceeding their increases in revenue. And so the property tax falls disproportionately on senior home owners relative to their ability to pay. And this was exacerbated in 2017 through the reevaluation, and Mike was able to model that. And if a home had a homestead exemption, meaning that they were 65 or older, we were able to show that they were disproportionately impacted through this reevaluation to the tune of about 6% of an increase. That's 3 unvoted mills. And so they had difficulty paying in the last election, and now we are trying to create a new system that would actually hurt them even more. So the earned income tax became even more of a viable option. And then what we hear in Granville schools when we enroll people who are coming here is we always ask, why did you come to Granville? And the number one reason is for the schools. And so we recognize that this earned income tax model would be aligning more of the ability to pay for the schools with the consumers of our product. And so those were some of the factors. It was a very long conversation over an extended period of time. But those were some of the key items that the board considered when making this shift from property tax to an earned income tax model. And final thoughts, the district kept its promise to stay off the ballot since 2013, but we didn't just maintain status quo. I think we've increased our market share as far as the quality of our school district. We've added project-based learning as an instructional methodology. We've shifted to a Chromebook technology to make sure that students are getting access to relevant information as opposed to a stagnant source of textbooks. We created a computer science pathway in partnership with CTEC to offer a cost-effective way to offer that course pathway to our students. And we're currently engaged in offering an entrepreneurial pathway with partnership with CTEC as well. All trying to maximize the dollars that the taxpayers entrust to Granville schools. 2018 is our only opportunity for an earned income tax. Mike is a taxation expert. I've been listening to him for a long time talk about this, so I think I can answer it. But the ramp up on collection is slower than it is in a property tax collection. And therefore, in the first year, in our first fiscal year, we will only receive about 6% of the revenue that will come from the earned income tax. In the second year, it's 85%. And then it's fully funded in year 3. That's why we have a little bit of a cash balance to be able to take this type of long-term approach to funding schools and balance our methodology of property tax and earned income tax. But past 2018, we will not have that cash balance and the ability to phase in and get the revenue needed to offset our operating deficits. And then what we believe is that this, if enacted, will allow us to stabilize our funding and support of our classroom instruction. It will help us bolster our facility preventative maintenance and also help address some of the catastrophic concerns that we're dealing with our facilities, and continue to educate Granville students in a way that will prepare them for life. So with that, I'm going to invite my colleague up because I'm sure there are going to be many questions, and we'd like to take your questions at this time. I'm going to grab my water.